Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. English 12th Goodbye Mr. Chips. Chapters 15, 16, 17, 18. Short questions. All Punjab boards. Previous annual papers of Lahore, Multan, Gujranwala, Sargodha, Rawalpindi, Sahiwal, Faisalabad, Bahawalpur, D.G.Khan and Jammu Kashmir boards. Chapter 15 Goodbye Mr. Chips. How did Chips encourage his students during the air raids of World War I? Why was Mr. Chips talking his class even during air raid? How many bombs were dropped near Brookfield? Describe in brief the horrors of air raid at Brookfield School. How many bombs were dropped by the German plants around Brookfield? What was Chips doing when bombs began to fall around? Why does the author call Mr. Chips a legend? How can we call Mr. Chips a legend? Who was called the Stink Merchant and why? Who was Burrow and why did Chips call him Stink Merchant? Whom did Chips call Stink Merchant? Who was Maynard and what did Chips say him to do? How did Chips get a chill in November 11, 1918? How did Chips take his class during the shelling? How did Mr. Chips keep the boys normal during the air raid? How did Brookfield celebrate the end of war? When was the word acting crossed out on official stationer? What kind of humor was that of Chips? Give a brief account of air strike at Brookfield. Who was Burrow? Chapter 16 Goodbye Mr. Chips. What did Chips say about Wurlitzer? What minor changes occurred in Brookfield School during the post-war decade? Did Chips mind when boys came to visit him? Who was Gregson? What do you know about Gregson? Where did Chips spend his money after retirement? What was Chips' will? Whom did Chips leave his money in his will? What do you know about Mr. Chips' will? What do you know about the general strike? What was Mr. Chips' opinion about general strike of 1926? What event took place in 1926 in England? How did the Brookfield boys help the people during the general strike of 1926? What role did Brookfield boys play during the general strike of 1926? What did Chips tell Gregson? Why could Chips not go abroad? How did Chips earn the reputation of a great jester? What did Chips like summer season? What will Chips did make in 1930? What was Chips' financial position after retirement? Chapter 17 Goodbye Mr. Chips. What did Mr. Merivale ask Mr. Chips to do for improvement of his health? Why did Chips become sad after Linford's departure? Who was Merivale? What did he say to Chips on the foggy morning? What were those which Chips could never do in his life? What were two things which Mr. Chips had never done? Where did Mr. Pickett go and what sort of arrangements did she make for Chips? What sort of discussion did Chips have with Linford? What happened to Chips when Linford departed? What were Mr. Chips' feelings after Linford's departure? What happened to Chips after that little boy Linford had said goodbye to him? What were Chips' feelings after Linford's departure? After Mrs. Wicker's departure, who answered when he bell rang? Who was Linford? Who attended on Mr. Chips before his death? What is the significance of the character of Linford in the novel? Describe briefly Linford meeting with Chips. Who said for the first time goodbye Mr. Chips? Who was Linford? How did Chips receive him? How did Mr. Chips entertain Linford? Why did Linford come to see Chips? Who sent Linford to Mr. Chips and why? What is the significance of the title Goodbye Mr. Chips? When and why did Mr. Chips resign again? What will Linford remember ever? How did Mr. Chips feel when Linford said him goodbye? What did Chips say to Linford about Brookfield? Chapter 18, Goodbye Mr. Chips. How did Mr. Chips make others laugh? Who was Cartwright and what did he say about Mr. Chips' children? Describe the death scene of Mr. Chips. Who was Chips' death announced in Brookfield? Who was made the head of Brookfield after Mr. Chips' retirement? Notes on Goodbye Mr. Chips. What did Chips remember just before his death? Write a brief note on Mr. Weatherby. Who was Mr. Weatherby and when did he join Brookfield School? Who was Meldrum and how and when he died? Write a brief note on Mr. Ralston. Write a brief note on Mr. Merivale. Write a note on Mrs. Wickett. Write a note on Brookfield. Describe the building of Brookfield Public School. Describe the rise and fall of Brookfield. When was Brookfield building rebuilt and extended? Write a short note on views and ideas of Catherine Bridge. What did Cartwright say in his speech about Chips' death? Write an account on Mr. Chips' married life. What influence did Catherine Bridge exercise on Mr. Chips? How did Catherine influence Chips? Was Chips a dry sort of man? Draw a character sketch of Mr. Chips. Write a note on Chips as a teacher. Can we look upon Mr. Chips as an institution of Brookfield? Draw a character sketch of Catherine Bridge. Write down a 5 sentences on views and ideas of Catherine Bridge. Describe the physical grace of Catherine. How did the news of Chips' quarrel spread? Who heard the quarrels between Ralston and Chips? And how did its news spread? What did Chips say to Cartwright in the end? When and how did Mr. Chips die at last? Like, share and subscribe my channel, Park Education Official.